Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sonia.
Hot potato. I've never met a potato I didn't love. I feel like this is the perfect topic with my Slavic roots, with your Midwestern roots. I'm sure you grew up eating a lot of potatoes.
I absolutely grew up eating so many different kinds of potatoes, but I think we have to start with the classic baked potato. And I have to share with you, Sonia, I discovered that I might have been baking my potatoes the wrong way the whole time because I discovered this new jacket potato. It's actually just new to me. Jacket potatoes, which are a British way of baking potatoes without aluminum foil and for a really long time.
Well, when our house, baked potatoes are jacket potatoes. It's something my husband, Jonathan, his mom always grew up calling baked potatoes jacket potatoes. That's what he knew them as. And it's interesting that you're talking about it with a different technique because I know that jacket potatoes have kind of become viral online and like, especially on TikTok. But yeah, what is it that you're learning that we've been doing wrong with our American baked potatoes?
Well, I knew that when I brought this to you, you would have some kind of I'm very slow to TikTok, but I discovered this TikTok where this woman was talking about, she's a British woman, she baked a jacket potato, and to illustrate how crispy the potato was, she sort of banged it on the counter and you could hear the crispiness. And so what I really learned is, you prepare it the same way you would prepare a baked potato. You scrub it really, really well, dry it off, coat it in a little bit of olive oil or, whatever oil you want to use. And then you cut an X in the top or a cross in the top. And that allows,
Instead of piercing it with a fork or with
instead
a
of
knife.
piercing it a bunch of times, which is what my family would do. We would pierce it with a
Yeah.
paring knife or with the tines of a fork. But you cut an X in it, which kind of helps like distribute the steam out of one place. And and the other thing too that people recommend is using like a fine salt. So you coat it in oil, add fine salt, cut the X, and bake it for like 2 to 2.5 hours, depending on the size of your potato, which is so much longer than I grew up baking my potatoes for.
Well, my hot potato take is that generally, including myself, I don't think we're baking our baked potatoes for long enough. I've often encountered underdone baked potatoes, which I think is just like the worst. The worst. It's like an
It's so
undercooked beans.
disappointing. It
It's
really
so disappointing to
is.
have a hard piece of potato. And I've been impatient too. And like I didn't start the process early enough, in making dinner. And I know some people even microwave their baked potatoes. Like I think my mom did that growing up a few times. But the idea of a really long roasted baked potato, when I've taken that time, makes such a huge difference.
It makes it so much fluffier. And that's what I think is so evident about like this very simple, like we know, you and I have just we talk a lot about how these simple steps in home cooking can either make a mediocre meal or a really amazing meal. And just leaving your baked potato uncovered yields this really and cooking it for a long time yields this really fluffy inside and a crispy outside. And isn't that really what we're looking for?
Yeah, and it just takes a little bit of planning and having that time before dinner. So maybe it's a good weekend meal. We have to talk about toppings because on these viral like jacket potato videos in England, and some of the people have these food carts and they're topping their baked potatoes with stuff that we don't typically top ours with here. Like I've seen it topped with chicken curry. And of
Oh,
course,
wow.
yeah, curries. And there's this classic British topping of the Heinz baked beans, which are different than our baked beans. They're not the
Really?
same. Oh, yeah, they're like more tomatoey, tangier, less sweet. But baked beans on top of a jacket potato with loads of cheese. Oh, I've seen some people top it with like tuna salad, tuna
Stop
and
it.
mayonnaise. I swear, and cheese. You're like, I would never. Well, you don't even
Well,
like
it's a
tuna.
whole world. It's like, I feel like my universe has been cracked. I did not know that you could make baked potatoes in a different way than the way I grew up eating them. And to learn that there's all these incredible toppings. And here we are just at the classic baked potato. So I know we have other potato dishes that we want to talk about today too.
Yeah, so Do you want to, sorry, do you want to add one thing about like I was curious what you topped your baked potato with. Do you want to say?
Oh, yeah, I can.
Yeah,
Yeah, let me
okay.
just say. Well, Sonia, I will say, like, I just like a very classic butter, sour cream, a little bit of scallion, and a lot of salt. Like, I like to keep it as classic as possible. I love that there is this world of like curries and all these things. I will say I'm 99% sure I'm not going to put tuna salad on the top of my baked potato, but I'm curious if you would try that.
I would totally try it, but I don't think it would be my go-to, but I would definitely try it. But would you put a bean on your baked potato?
You know, I think I would put a bean on my baked potato. It sounds like a fun, like, instead of having beans with like toast, you would have beans with potato. And I think I could get into that.
It reminds me of your potato nachos, which is a whole other recipe we don't have to get into that
Right.
we've talked about before. But the combination of
Yeah.
beans and potatoes is a classic. I feel like it works really well. And
And
seeing these
cheese. So
and the
like you're saying they put
cheese,
cheese on top of
yeah, a
it.
lot of
Yeah.
cheese. They put crispy onions. They put some kind of sauce on top.
Oh
It's
my
wild.
gosh.
It's like looks like it feeds like seven people, like one potato. It's so much food. All right. But we want to talk about a little bit more than baked potatoes. I have a kind of potato that I just love, which is a Greek lemon potato.
I've never had Greek lemon potatoes, but I have heard of them. And I kind of love this idea. Potatoes are so comforting and rich and filling, but to add an element like lemon to it, I'm so curious. Like, what, do you just put lemon on when they're done cooking, or what is this process?
That certainly works, but this is actually a technique. It's like, so what you do is you take your potatoes, you want something like a Yukon Gold or a russet, something that's going to be fluffy on the inside and get really browned on the outside. You cut it into wedges, ideally. So, like, half an inch, no, I'd say like an inch thick or 2 inches thick. And you put them in a baking dish or a casserole pan. One important note, it's not great to use glass for this dish. It's better to have like a metal baking dish or ceramic. It will help it get more browned. Okay, so then you put your wedges in a single layer and you add broth, like chicken broth or vegetable broth. This is
Oh,
what's going to
wow.
make it different. And you also add lemon juice and you add a lot of olive oil. So there's some different recipes, but every recipe involves adding broth and lemon juice. Some have it added at the beginning, some have it added later. The recipe that I really love, and it has like so many 5-star reviews. What she has you do is you add half a cup of olive oil, like a quarter cup of lemon juice. I think it's another cup or
A
half a
lot of
cup of
lemon
broth.
juice.
It's a lot of lemon juice.
Yeah.
And you add that with the potatoes all at once with your salt and your garlic, your oregano. You put that in the oven for 45 minutes.
Do you cover it?
I can't remember if you cover it, but it takes like I'm pretty sure it's uncovered, but don't quote me on that. So you put it in the oven for 45 minutes and then you let it sort of absorb all of that liquid and it starts to get browned. And then there's this note, which is like you can serve it just as is, like tender, browned. You want to let it rest because it will continue like absorbing any excess liquid. But if you want a crispy potato, what you then do is transfer this potato onto a sheet pan and you cook it for another 35 to 40 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So if you want a crispy lemony potato, which is my preference, yeah, you're talking about a nearly 2-hour potato. These are
Yeah.
obviously not 30-minute meals, but how delicious will that be with that crispiness and the acidity? And again, you could keep it softer and just browned. It's up to you.
Yeah, it's like in some ways, what I'm realizing through our research and our conversation is that we should be cooking our potatoes so much longer. If we really want these sort of crispy edges and this fluffiness that people are also looking for in their
Yes.
potatoes. And I think trying to fit them into a 30-minute meal doesn't make sense, but also a lot of this time is just like, unattended time. It's just time in the oven. It's not time that you're actually having to like fry potatoes in on your stove or anything like that.
That's such a good point because like the jacket potato, it's 2 hours of no time. Like you just scrub some potatoes, put them in the
Yeah.
oven. This is you cut some potatoes, you toss them with some ingredients. That probably takes 10 minutes tops in total. And then it's just, an hour and a half, depending
Yeah,
what
you're
you,
checking it,
yeah.
you're putting them on a sheet pan and then you're putting them back in. So
Yeah.
there's just like a one little check. It's like switching the laundry from the washer to the dryer.
Oh, such a good analogy.
Well, Sonia, I really wanted to bring a Midwestern kind of casserole to this conversation.
Oh, I'm here for it, Carrie.
And I found this incredibly charming dish called tater tot casserole. And I did not grow up eating a tater tot casserole, but if my mom had known about it, I'm 100% sure she would have made this for us. And what I realized, I've never made shepherd's pie, but what this is just a more shortcut version of shepherd's pie. Do you make shepherd's pie?
I've definitely made shepherd's pie. I wouldn't say
Okay.
it's like my on regular rotation, but I've sometimes clients would request it. It's such a classic comfort food.
It's a classic comfort food and there's so many similarities between the two. So, shepherd's pie is usually like ground beef and ground lamb, and then it has some kind of vegetable element and some kind of gravy element that makes it, sort of
Saucy, like a chicken pot pie.
yeah, saucy like a chicken pot pie, and then you cover it with mashed potatoes. So it's like these sort of two like big things that you have to do to put it all into one casserole and bake it in the oven. What's great about a tater tot casserole is it really simplifies the whole process. So you take some ground beef, you fry it up in a pan. You can add, onion, garlic, you can add some seasonings to this. My mom would probably have not added any of those things, but then you put that into a casserole dish and you add a can of cream of mushroom soup or cream of chicken soup or cream of celery soup, just some kind of like condensed soup, which gives it like that gravy flavor. And then you add a can of green beans, and some people add corn to it. So a can of green beans to this. And then you add cheese, and then you add tater tots on top, and you slide the whole thing in the oven and you cook it for maybe 45 minutes until it's crispy on top and everything is hot on the inside. And I will say one of the recipes I found that I think I that we're going to link to that I thought was really smart was that she made some really specific points about making sure that you season every layer of your casserole. And I think that's a complaint that I would offer growing up. My mom was good at seasoning, so I felt like when we had casseroles, they had good flavor. But for instance, she makes the point that like when you add the green beans, you should make sure you season them very well with salt and pepper because you want each of these elements, even though they are all baked into this sort of like, into one space, you want them all to have these, distinct flavors. And the other thing is that the recipe that I used and that I found and I tried is you put the cheese on top and then you put the tater tots on top of that. And sometimes people like to mix them. And so you're just getting a different experience. Like if you just have tater tots on top, they'll be really crispy. But if you put the cheese, you sort of have like cheesy, crispy, sort of crispy, but more cheesy topping. And so it really kind of becomes like a preference. There's a lot of different recipes out there. So I think you kind of have to decide what you're looking for.
I have never made a tater tot casserole. I don't know if I've ever eaten one, but I recently learned, and I hope that this is true because otherwise I'll feel really silly, that the tater tot was invented in Oregon, where I
Oh.
live currently. And so there's a tremendous amount of tater tots on menus in the state, and that is why I didn't realize there was like a connection. I have noticed there's tater tots everywhere, but I have seen these tater tot casseroles. I think Molly Yeh has one that was really interesting. It may have even been like a mashup of Jewish and Midwestern sort of flavors. But the idea of taking like a meat mixture with some vegetables, adding some kind of saucy element and topping it with tater tots, I get it conceptually. I don't know if I'm sold on condensed soup. Like I'm all for canned vegetables. I just don't know if like I personally would do that. Would you play around and make your own like bechamel or your own sauce?
So here's what I did, and I fully was thinking of you the entire time that I was making. So I made two versions. I made like the
Wow.
the classic version that had the cheddar cheese and the condensed soup. And then I recently made your mushroom soup, which I really love. And so I used that as like the sauce that I put over top of
Smart.
the beef. And I also had a diner at my table that's like kind of sensitive to dairy. And so I used dairy shreds or like the non-dairy, the sort of non-dairy shreds. And I actually liked that one the best. And part of it was
Interesting.
because the flavor of your mushroom soup is so mushroom umami, and that just went really well with the ground beef. And I had added like, an onion and some garlic and black pepper. And I think you want those elements to have a lot of flavor on their own. But I really liked how the non-dairy shreds were like kind of creamy. And I just felt like the cheddar cheese, like, I don't know, it was like too cheesy.
Like a
It
little
was,
heavy with all the tater
it
tots because
was
tater tots
heavy.
are rich.
Tater tots are rich, and it was just kind of like this heavy glob of cheese on top, as opposed to like the non-dairy shreds, which almost kind of felt like a bechamel. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. And I used like the Italian version, so it was like slightly more like, a sharper flavor than just the sharp cheddar. I don't know. I preferred the non-dairy version actually. But I think that also had a lot to do with, a homemade soup, which, you could do a mushroom soup, or you could do like a creamy cauliflower soup, or just like a really flavorful puree of vegetables and use that instead of a condensed soup, I think.
Yeah, I think there's room to play around. I think that's true of every casserole. I think that's the point of a casserole is to not get too committed to any one recipe. And actually, in Jewish food, there's a whole category of casseroles called kugels. They are just like defined as essentially baked casseroles. And kugels can be made with noodles. That's one that's usually people are most familiar with, like a sweet noodle kugel, which is, I know sometimes hard for people to wrap their minds around like sweet pasta, but that's what it is. And there's like apple kugels, broccoli kugels, all these different kugels. Of all of them, my absolute favorite kugel and the one I truly serve for holidays over and over is potato kugel.
So, what is in a potato kugel? Is there any condensed soup?
No, there's no condensed soup. I don't think they had that in Poland or wherever this was first invented. I'm pretty sure it was invented in Poland or somewhere in Eastern Europe. But what you do is you take potatoes, again, starchier potatoes are better. I really love a russet for this, but you can definitely use the Yukon Gold as well. And I love to use my food processor shredding attachment because it just makes life so much easier. But you could shred your potatoes by hand if you want to do that. And so you shred a big batch of potatoes. You can peel it or not peel it. I tend to like it unpeeled because I don't like those flecks of brown, but some people don't want to bother peeling. That's fine. And then it's a bunch of eggs and some oil and salt and pepper and onion too. Some people add onion, some people don't. I usually, what I do is actually shred the onion through the food processor as well so that it gets really finely minced because I think it incorporates better and I don't like chunks of onion. And then one of the tips to making a crispier kugel. So basically it's like a giant hash brown. You're getting this like shredded potato mixture that's a little bit eggy subtly, that has a little fat from oil, not butter, that's salty. But what you do is you get your baking dish, whatever it is, a Pyrex, a metal dish, doesn't really matter, foil works, and you get oil in it and you put that and you let it preheat in the oven. And then
Oh,
you dump the mixture into the pan so it starts getting like
it
crispy.
immediately starts getting crispy on. This is how I
Yes.
make my cornbread. Is
Yes.
I put my cast iron skillet in the oven like 450 degrees and with oil in it. And then when you pour the batter in, or like what you're saying, you're pouring all these like, egg mixture of, potatoes and onion, it immediately starts to cook and get crispy on the edges.
Exactly. And then you bake that for a long time. And I think sometimes people don't do it for long enough. But what you're
Right?
really looking for, I'm always like, bake it. It's like pie. People also underbake pie. It's like
Mhm.
you want the deepest golden brown top and sides, and you don't have to worry, it's not going to burn. It just like won't. But the inside gets all kind of creamy and it's thick. It's not meant to be light and fluffy. It's a different experience. It's like,
It's almost like a cake, it sounds like
well,
do you slice it like a cake?
you
Like
slice it
in
into
like
squares.
squares?
Yeah, but
Okay.
it's not cake-like. It's really denser, and that's satisfying. Like it's crispy on the outside and dense in the center, but cooked through. And it's just such a delicious side. Like at the restaurant, we always served it with our braised brisket. So
Oh
you would
yeah.
have like that pan sauce from the brisket cover the kugel, and then we had like a little pickly element on the plate. And so you had that like sharpness of like the pickle and then the richness of the meat and then the savory potato and onion. It's so yummy.
Oh, I'm so sorry that I missed that. That sounds so incredible. I think I love this idea of the eggs kind of holding it all together too. That makes total sense to me. And that makes it, to your point, I think more dense and less creamy than a lot of these, sort of Midwestern potato casseroles that I grew up eating that were, had some kind of condensed soup in them and then also a lot of sour cream. And, that adds an element that is a completely different experience than what you're talking about. And so I have once made a potato kugel and I think I didn't cook it long enough. I think that's
Yeah,
what I didn't get. And that's really something I'm learning. That's what I love about food too, is that like, I've been eating baked potatoes my whole life and I've been eating, we've been eating potatoes our whole lives and there's still so much more that you can learn about them?
absolutely.
So, Sonia, speaking of something I've been eating my whole life, I one of the first dishes I ever made was a twice baked potato. And I think even in this process of us talking about potatoes, I think it was one of those like I grew up eating baked potatoes. And as a teenager who was learning how to cook, I was like, oh, I want to be a little extra. I'm going to add something fancy to my baked potatoes. So I learned how to twice bake them. And I love a very classic twice baked potato with like sour cream, cheddar, onion, bacon, and a whole lot of butter. And I will say, I was looking up recipes. I follow my own recipe, but I looked up a recipe from the Pioneer Woman, and she has this video that is so incredibly charming. She's making potatoes, twice baked potatoes for like 20 people. So she puts like 4 sticks of butter into them and like 2 containers of sour cream. And it was really like, I found it to be very charming. And she was kind of like unapologetic about it. And then also like, these are for 20 people. So I divided it up and it's like 1 tablespoon of butter per half a potato.
I don't know about that. But can you walk me through? I love your twice baked potatoes. You made them once at one of the retreats that we chefed together. And I remember thinking like it was one of the best things ever because I did not grow up with it. It's not familiar in my family and it does feel like quintessentially American and Midwestern to me. So just remind me how you make them.
So I think that the process kind of matters, like most of these things. So you bake a potato, get as we've learned, you need to give it a lot of time. When your potato is cooked, you cut it in half. So you have these two shells, and then you want to scoop out the middle. And I feel like you really want to kind of you still want a shell, but you want to scoop it pretty well. And so you take your potato from the middle, you put them into a bowl, and this was one of the notes that actually Ree Drummond used in her video, which was like she did not have a big enough bowl. I think you need a bowl that you can really mash your potato into. So you've got your bowl, you've got all the filling of however many potatoes that you want to be serving. And what I like to do is I like to melt my butter. So I pour melted butter over this potato mixture and I mash it really well because I really want it to be kind of like soaked in and I salt it really well starting from that point too. So this is a really taste as you go kind of recipe. So once it's like fluffy and buttery and really worked in, then I start to add sour cream. And I usually add scallions or chives, whatever I have on hand. And you want it to have that like tang from the sour cream and you want like that sharpness from the onion. And so then I taste it, add more salt, add more pepper if it needs to. And then I fold in cheddar cheese. And once that's done, then you can just fill them back into the shells. And I do like to serve mine with bacon, but I crisp the bacon separately and I like to serve that on top as opposed to inside of the potato because if you cook it inside of the potato, you have the bacon flavor, but you don't have like the crispy texture. And
Gets
so
soggy.
it gets too like soft and soggy. And that's not there's definitely a lot of people who like their bacon inside of their twice baked. I don't like it that way.
So then you like stick it back in the oven, all these filled shells. You keep the bacon separate until the end, till you're serving, and you let it just kind of heat through and get browned on top.
Yeah, it just needs to heat through and all that butter and cheese will create a crispy layer on top, which is really exciting and fun. And what I love about this recipe too is that it's make ahead. So, like, even a few days in advance, if you're having a dinner party, or even if you're just having like a dinner and you want a twice baked potato, you can make all of this ahead of time and slide them into the oven. And then if you're gonna, fry a steak or grill a steak or something like that, it's all of that reheating time is all hands off. And so
Wait,
it's
so you fill them and cook them and then refrigerate them, or do you fill them, keep them in the fridge, and then when you're ready to heat them up, that's okay, that makes
I
sense
don't
to
cook
me.
that. I only
Yeah,
cook them twice, not three times. So it's
right,
like you
got it.
you make the filling, you fill them, and then I slide them into the fridge and pull them out when I'm ready. And it really, it's just this like extra version of a baked potato. And I really like all it's like buttery, tangy, cheesy, and then if you add the bacon on top, it's like crunchy and, delicious.
What's not to like? If we're talking about childhood comfort food, one of the ultimate dishes that my grandmother always made for me and my brother was this dish called fried potatoes, and often with hot dogs. And in Russian,
What?
yes, in Russian, it sounds simple because you're like, what's interesting about fried potatoes? But it's very different than any other kind of potato I've had. In Russian, we call it жареная картошка. And it was, my brother could eat like a whole skillet worth by himself. It was so addictively delicious. And again, it's not like exactly other potatoes. So even though it's going to sound simple, there is some technique. And both my grandmothers made this. And I'm certain that almost everyone who grew up with like a Ukrainian or Russian or Belarusian grandmother had this on their table, or parent or grandfather. But the technique is you cut up your potatoes into either like fry like shapes, or sometimes you can do half moons. It's really about just having them all evenly thick. You can cut them however you want. I try not to get pieces that are bigger than half an inch, usually more like quarter-inch thickness. And
Because you're
then,
frying them in a
yeah,
pan on the stove, correct?
yes, you're going to
Okay.
fry them in it's not a deep fry, it's not a French fry. So, one grandmother, what she would do is salt them. And then I don't know why she would do this. She would put them like on I think a towel, and then put like a bowl over them and let them sit for like half an hour, like draining, like getting the moisture out. Another version is to actually soak them in cold water for 5 to 10 minutes. And that helps, like, it basically is going to help them hold their shape and crisp up. So I typically do that. I'll soak them for 5 to 10 minutes in cold water, drain them, dry them really, really well, pat them really, really well dry in either preparation. And then, like, while they're soaking and while they're sort of drying, I'll do the other steps, which is to fry some onion in your skillet. And if you're going to use hot dogs, this is the time to sort of like slice up your hot dogs or kielbasa and fry that up in a skillet. And then you kind of
Wow.
scoop that out of the pan, reserve it. Then you fill your pan with a generous amount of oil. This is not the time to skimp on oil. This is a fried potato. This is stick to your ribs comfort food. And this is why my grandmothers made it for us, because they knew how much we would like it as kids. So you have like a thick coating of oil in your pan and over like medium heat. You don't want it too hot or too low. And then you put your dried patted down potatoes in an even layer. And this is where you want to resist the urge to futz with them too much. Like you want to just let them brown. And what happens is like you let them sit for about like basically 10 to 12 minutes, and they'll start to
Without
brown.
touching them, without
I
futzing with
mean,
them.
I'll peek at them to make sure my temperature isn't too hot, but you're really giving them time to brown, and then you start moving them around, and the whole process takes at least 25 minutes to really brown your
Oh, wow.
potatoes. You're giving it a lot of time, and you want to get them browned on all sides, but some are going to get crispier, some are going to be softer. That's part of the fun of жареная картошка, is like who gets the crispiest bits. You're kind of always fighting for the edges because that's the best part. And then in the last few minutes, you add those onions and hot dogs, if you're using it, back to the pan, and you just heat them through with the potatoes. It is so delicious. This is simple food, but it's just I don't know, I crave it. And in fact, we just moved, as you're well aware.
Yes.
And one of the last meals in our old house was this, because I was just having such a hard time moving. And I was like, what will make me feel better tonight? And I was like, oh, I can just make some fried potatoes.
I mean, it just sounds like pure comfort food. And, the fact that both of your grandmothers also made this is it's just so loving, and really like basic ingredients, like very classic ingredients, but I love your tips for the preparation. I think that really makes a difference. And, I imagine your whole house smells like fried onion, potato, hot dog.
Yeah, but not in a bad way, not as bad as latkes to any of the people who make those.
Speaking of fried potatoes, Sonia, I love a crispy oven baked potato chip. And I had this client years ago. They really liked the same thing every time. Every week I came, I would make these oven baked potato chips. So I got really good at them. And I will say there's kind of two ways to think about a potato chip. Like you can think about an oven baked potato chip like you would a kettle chip, like very thin and crispy. And you can also think about it in maybe a way that you just described, which is like you cut them a little bit thicker. And so they're crispy on the outside, but there is still this like tender potatoy middle. And so it really is depends on like what you're interested in. When I first started cooking for this client, I would do all these potatoes by hand. And then this is
Whoa.
also a place where, so you can definitely do them, cut them with a knife. And I think that also yields what you just described, which is like some bits are more tender and fluffy and some bits are more crispy, because there's that uneven experience. But I think that kind of yields like the best of all worlds. You can also use a mandolin. And I will say, like, I made trays upon trays of roasted these crispy potato chips every week. So I definitely started using a mandolin. And, there's a few simple steps to take. One is, like you said, you want to make sure that they're dried really well. You want to make sure that they're coated in oil. They don't need to be swimming in oil, but they need to like a solid coating in oil. And you also don't want to crowd your baking sheets. And so, whenever I went to this client's house, I would take a stack of baking sheets with me because it does take time. And so if you only have, like, depending on the size of your oven, most people can just put two baking sheets in at a time. And so
Yeah.
I would always have like two more ready to go. And especially at the beginning when I was cutting them with a knife, sometimes I would take a few out, that were getting too browned, and then I would slide the sheet back in. So this family, they really liked the classic flavors. I would do olive oil, I would do salt. Again, a fine salt here is a little bit better than like a kosher salt because it sticks to the potato better. You can add paprika. I would usually add a little bit of garlic, garlic powder. You don't want to use whole garlic because that will burn in the oven. And I like to kick the oven up to like 425, 450, especially if you're opening the oven to check on them. You really want to just like keep the oven going. And, this is also, I think, a great place if you are someone who likes a seasoned salt, like if you have your own special seasoned salt or like a Lowry's or a Montreal steak seasoning. If those are flavors that you like, this is a great tapestry to work with.
Sounds so good. I love a homemade potato chip. I haven't made one in a while, and I love it in the oven. It's different than a deep fried potato chips, which I also have made in the past, but that has a totally different texture and that tends to be so oily at home. There's something about the oven and how it gets it crispy, but there's still a little bit of fluffiness. It's such a smart way to do something fun with a potato at home. But Carrie, I think if we're talking about potatoes, we just have to mention potato salad. Like I have to have a salad somewhere. You know it. You know
I
I can't
know,
leave a
I know.
conversation without a salad. And I've talked a lot about like Russian potato salad and herby potato salad, which is in my cookbook. But there's another kind of salad that's really similar to what I make that kind of blew me away, which is an Allison Roman brown butter potato salad.
Wait, what?
I think you're going to kind of be obsessed with this. So, just to clarify, it starts with 3 pounds of potatoes. That's sort of important because there's going to be huge amounts of ingredients that are going to sound like that's a lot. So, your 3 pounds of potatoes, a fair amount. I think she recommends a waxy potato, but I'm not sure. I think any potato could really work for this. And then you take a stick of butter and you get that nice and browned. And then you add a quarter cup of olive oil to that butter into your
Oh my
pan,
gosh.
2 jars of capers, like 2 little jars
Oh
of
wow.
capers,
Okay,
to that
drained.
drain to that
Okay.
olive oil and brown butter, and a sliced onion, like a red onion, like sliced into thick wedges. And you kind of cook the capers and onion in that brown butter and olive oil. And of course, you cook your potatoes until they're fork tender. And then you have your cut, cubed, cooked potatoes in your bowl. You pour this over the potatoes. And then you also add 3 tablespoons of a good vinegar, a fourth cup of whole grain mustard, which I love in my potato salad. And the last ingredient, which has to be in my potato salad, is 2 whole cups of chopped dill.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of dill.
It's a lot of dill, it's a lot of capers, and it's a fair amount of butter and oil. But I think that a potato salad needs all that. You want all that punchy flavor and something that's starchy because this is a salad, it's not mashed potatoes. I
Yeah.
just think it's
And there's no
so
mayonnaise. I love
no
that it's such a
mayonnaise.
departure from what, at least what I think is like a classic mayonnaise-based potato salad, which of course there are all these vinegar-based potato salads too, but listen, when I discovered brown butter, it really like changed my life. I think that nutty depth of flavor, olive oil, like, all these capers and then all this dill. I don't know. It just sounds kind of like the best of all worlds to me. I'm definitely going to try this.
I think it's a really good potluck, like unexpected potato salad. Yeah, with that nuttiness, the brininess, the sort of sharpness, and the herbiness, it hits all those notes.
Yeah, I really love that. Well, Sonia, this has been really fun. I love talking about potatoes with you, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface. So we might have to record another episode because there's so many more dishes I want to talk about.
There's an endless world of potatoes. And if you have an amazing potato recipe, we definitely want to hear. You can subscribe to our Substack. We send out the recipe roundups every Wednesday, and you can comment on those posts and let us know what you're cooking up. So we love hearing from you.
Yeah, we'd love to know. Well, this has been fun. Until next time,
Bye.
bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.